Welcome to Archery Popshots, a series in which I, as a real archer, critique archery in video games. For lovers of gruesome medieval combat who aren't watching this video in 2012, you're probably already on the battlefield of Mordhau, a spiritual successor and a much improved upgrade to the acclaimed chivalry medieval warfare. Mordhau brings the player into the dirty, up-close and personal combat, featuring numerous armor sets, dozens of deadly weapons, and a simple yet well-executed combat system. Swing, parry, thrust, riposte, kick, chamber, morph, accelerate, drag, and taunt your way through the battlefield. Blade-on-blade combat has never been so much fun. And then you have bows. Whether you're a chivalry veteran or a new Mordhau fan, you probably gave a collective sigh as you felt yet another annoying prick in your side. You're enjoying the most intense duel, and some cowardly scum has to pick a bow and shoot you in the back. Screw archers. Unfortunately, as I am an archer, I had to put aside my love of melee and roleplay as one such annoying archer scumbag, and I actually had quite a bit of fun, even if it came at the expense of others. So, let's take a look at the bows and archery in Mordhau, how it works in the game, and throw a bit of historical commentary for flavour. Mordhau differs from many class-based games in that it doesn't have classes. While there are some default archetype characters to start off with, the heart of the game is in creating your own custom mercenaries with in-game gold, earned from fighting in battles. With a limited pool of mercenary points, players have to balance out their weapon loadout, armor and perks, such that a single build can't have everything. For those looking at playing as an archer, and yes, there are people who do that, the default huntsman class is the starting point. After gaining some gold, you can purchase the bows for your own builds, of which there are 3. The longbow is the most versatile, the general purpose bow as you will. Somewhat slow but dealing high damage, excellent for long distance shots. The recurve bow is a smaller, lighter, faster and weaker option, with less sway and more suited for closer distance harassment. The crossbow is as strong as the longbow and can be held indefinitely without shaking, though it must be manually loaded between shots, leaving the user momentarily vulnerable. The crossbow's ease of use makes it effective at picking off targets of opportunity and excellent for counter-archer combat. Because the bows take up a significant number of points, it is unlikely that a character build will incorporate much else. Typically, an archer build will have light or medium armor at best, along with a sidearm, such as an arming sword or warhammer for personal defense, and in this regard, a competent player can hold their own with carefully timed parries and counters to defeat more heavily armed opponents. This is important as being hit while holding the bow knocks it out of your hands, forcing you to switch weapons and fight in melee. Even without the duress, an archer may choose to rush into the fray to help allies deal with enemies instead of hanging back to take pot shots. While being struck by arrows is annoying and distracting, archers are seldom a threatening presence, since it takes many arrows to bring down armored opponents. Thus, hitting a random enemy may simply tickle them, and they'll recover by the time they reach the front line. This isn't useless, however, as picking bloody targets may result in opportunistic kills, or weaken enemies to be finished off by your teammates. Archers can also bring down mounted combatants with well-timed shots, who would otherwise run rampant around the map and pick off individual players at whim. Archers, especially using the longbow and crossbow, are ideally suited to engage other archers. The Huntsman perk gives bonus damage against other archers, with a single torso hit enough for a kill. This brings up some very fun counter-sniping sprees and archer duels separate from the battle raging in the middle. The battlefields of Mordhau don't really showcase archers in their historical roles as mass-range units, as you really only have a handful of archers on the team. However, a small group of archers fighting together can actually be quite effective, as they can bring down a single enemy with rapid hits, compared to the slow and vulnerable solo engagement when fighting alone. Finally, bows have a unique purpose in Horde mode, with the standard strategy being to load up on ranged weapons and climb ladders to deal with the hordes below. Though recent patches have nerfed this strategy in that the AI fighters throw area damage turds. Yes, you heard that right. This still remains the safest way to complete the mode. As an archer, you have to deal with multiple challenges if you are aiming to contribute to your team. The first is surviving. It's very tempting to get close to the front lines to get easier shots, but if you choose to do so, you must not become tunnel visioned, as the rapid flow of the battle will mean that enemies will spawn and flank you, easily killing you on sight. Even when perched on advantageous positions, you will be rushed by a lone player who can easily dispatch you as you slowly load your next shot. Your presence will also be obvious to eagle-eyed enemy archers who will counter-snipe you as you stand outlined in predictable places. Staying alive also means constantly maintaining situational awareness, scanning your surroundings between shots, and relocating frequently to avoid counter-sniping. It's scary how often you will see someone of the opposing color running at you when you turn around. Listen to your instincts. If you feel like someone is coming up to you right about now, you're probably right. Next is making sure your shots count. Unfortunately, there's no easy way of doing this, and that's probably a good thing. Your arrows move slower than you may initially think, especially if you're used to faster first-person shooters, and when you start, you will always feel like you're a split second too slow and the arrow whooshes behind your target. Even when you get used to the arrow speed, the erratic movement of human players all but makes it impossible to get a bead on your target, with shots going off the mark and often hitting your teammates. My advice here is to avoid the rote action of knocking and shooting into the crowd or trying to twitch play with a bow on a close opponent. Instead, analyze each situation and recognize patterns in player actions. It's easier to hit a player moving in one direction at a constant speed than someone dancing around in melee. If you are shooting at someone who is fighting an ally, you'll recognize their dueling habits from a distance, such as when they move forward or backpedal. Position your crosshair to where you think they'll be and let them walk into the shot. In my opinion, the crossbow is the easiest to use for this purpose, as it can be held indefinitely, while the recurve and longbow will begin to shake when held too long. Experienced players will often snap shoot with these bows, letting go as soon as they get to full draw or even slightly before. You're also better off going for light armor targets, as the damage reduction from medium and heavy armor largely negates the effect of range damage. Hitting a heavy armor melee fighter once or twice probably won't give your team any advantage, and it's an inefficient use of your ammunition. If you're going to be an archer scum and annoy the enemy team, at least help out your team by picking the right positions to cover the moving front line rather than cherry pick the easy distant shots. We're going to briefly go through the historical accuracy of the archery in Mordhau. Obviously, the game isn't meant to be historically accurate, so we're not going to roast the game over things like damage and balance. This is more to prompt some questions and curiosity, and maybe learn something new. Firstly, do bows handle the way you see them in the game? The archery kind of feels slow, both in shooting speed and arrow speed. For the longbow, this is roughly about right, given that the game leans towards faster loading speed to keep you in the action. While a lighter modern bow can be drawn and aimed much more quickly, a medieval warbow might be in excess of 80 pounds of draw, and the English longbows were over 100 pounds. Drawing these bows required careful technique and physical exertion, so the sluggish pace of drawing and aiming the longbow is a relatively decent reflection. The recurve bow is meant to represent the recurved horse bows used in this time, more commonly in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Typically, these are meant to be shot with a thumb draw from the other side of the bow, but the game models the same technique as the longbow, I'm assuming for the sake of simplicity. While the recurve bow is a little faster, I would actually expect a real-life archer to shoot these even faster. I also feel that the power of the bow is a little undervalued, as the arrows drop quite soon, making long-range shooting difficult. The crossbow handles a bit too quickly compared to real life. Light crossbows could be loaded by hand, but heavier crossbows would have required additional tools such as a belt hook or devices such as the goat's foot. The game's rate of fire makes it comparable to the other bows, and I think the crossbow could be slowed down a bit between shots, and perhaps balanced by giving it a bit more damage. Regarding the visual depiction of these bows, the crossbow looks like a typical medieval crossbow, so that gets a pass. It's worth noting that the stirrup at the end of the crossbow is meant to have your foot placed into it when loading the bow, so that you could pull the string up, which the animation doesn't show. The default longbow skin looks more or less similar to an English longbow in size and shape. The alternate skin resembles a Homingard or flat bow. The divided skin with the limbs bolted onto the handle is definitely a fantasy design. Medieval bows were not manufactured this way, and this is an allusion to a modern bow design. The bolts may actually weaken the bow, causing the wood to split from stress. The recurve bow's divided skin is similar, however the default skin seems to be an all-wood design. Historically, these bows were commonly made of composite materials, namely wood, horn, and sinew. This is because the materials combining tension and compression strength allowed for stronger bows to be made in a more compact size, especially without the wide availability of appropriate woods for longer bows. Finally, while the game obviously measures damage appropriately, the heavy plate armor would have been highly effective at deflecting the arrows used, making armored fighters arrow-proof in real life. This lopsided performance would eventually lead to the historical shift from bows to firearms. As interesting as this may all be, I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't changed your mind about archery in Mordhau. To be perfectly honest, Mordhau isn't the kind of game that embellishes or rewards archery. It is, at its core, a melee combat game, and the game's mechanics all revolve around the intensity of hand-to-hand fighting. This isn't to say that archery has no role. While fairly superficial, games like Mordhau include ranged weapons to introduce another element to the battlefield, forcing players not to be too comfortable with running headlong into the melee. Effective archers can help control the battle with area denial, pushing back overconfident players and just generally causing frustration. The main thing to consider is whether you're missing out on the game by playing as an archer. The rest of the game has so much depth to it compared to the point and click of archery. It's hard to justify your place in the team as an archer when you could be another spear or sword in the front line to fight at objectives and bring down numerous enemies. Overall, archery is what you'd expect in a fast-paced action game like Mordhau. It's there, but it's clearly not the focus and it's overshadowed by other weaponry. If you're looking at this medieval combat game for the archery, this isn't that kind of game. But if, like most people, you're drawn in by the intense combat, Mordhau is an excellent time sink and a satisfying experience if you invest the time to learn the mechanics. Thank you for watching this episode of Archery Popshots. This is NUSensei, and as usual, shoot straight and aim for your best.